My room only has one bed. Naomi, a black woman shunned by the townsfolk of Green Hollow, spoke the words in her cold wooden cabin as in the midst of a dust-driven night, a stranger knocked at her door. For years she had known nothing but an empty bed, the scornful looks of neighbors, and the gossip that sealed her life shut on the margins. Yet tonight, that knock sent her heart trembling, part fear, part longing. In the pale moonlight seeping through the curtain, the tall frame of a man appeared, his breath a cloud in the frigid air. Naomi clutched at her dress, bracing for another cold gaze. But instead, his deep, rough voice came steady, certain. Then let us share the bed, forever, if need be. The words did not fall as a request, but as a quiet vow, one strong enough to warm the long, lonely years Naomi thought would never end. Autumn of 1878, desert winds came rolling down from the Black Mesa, whipping sand into blind whirlwinds that swallowed the edge of Green Hollow. Naomi Carter was long accustomed to the silence of her wooden shack. For years, it had been the only companion that remained when the town slammed its doors against a black woman living alone. Tonight was no different, only the flicker of a kerosene lamp and the hiss of wind through the cracks. She sat hunched at a rickety table, her slender fingers twisting strands of coiled hair to keep them from tangling in the gusts. Each repeated motion was less a habit than a way to fill the hollow. Into that murky stillness came a sudden pounding at the door, sharp enough to snatch the breath from her chest. Her hand froze. Her ribs tightened, breath catching short. In a life drawn narrow and closed, any break in the pattern meant danger. Folks in Green Hollow didn't come knocking on this shack at night. They'd grown too used to pretending she was invisible. Naomi moved, slow step by slow step, toward the door. Bare feet pressed against the cold planks, every creak loud against the howling wind. She paused, hand resting on the latch, listening. The knock came again, harder, urgent. Someone out there was fighting for shelter. Whispers from long years scraped across her mind. A woman alone is easy pickings. Ain't no man ever gonna marry her. If she let a strange man cross her threshold, by morning the town would have another tale to laugh at. Yet if she didn't, would that soul die out there in the storm? The thought tangled her heart into knots. She slid the latch free. The wind burst in, tossing the patched curtain and snuffing the lamp. In the dim haze she saw him, a tall man, shoulders caked with dust, hat pulled low over half his face. His breath smoked thick in the air, hands rough and calloused clutching at the doorframe like a drowning man gripping a rope. "Give me shelter." His voice was deep, ragged, plain. No pleading, no threat. Naomi squinted, taking him in under the moonlight that sifted through the grit. The hard, square jaw, the gray eyes deep as a canyon. No one in Green Hollow carried a look like that. She clutched her skirt, fear sparking sharp. "My room," she swallowed dry, voice trembling, "has only one bed." The words slipped out, more warning to herself than to him. She wanted a wall between them, a shield against the stories that had cut her down for years. Naomi Carter had grown used to being treated as something discarded, and she would not hand the town another knife to carve her with. The man, Colton Hayes, did not step forward, did not retreat. He stood rooted, the storm tearing at his coat and flashing the silver gun at his hip. Naomi's pulse thudded as if she'd invited peril itself inside, but his eyes on her were not like the others she'd known. No contempt, no hunger, only steadiness, the kind of calm that comes from weathering storms, worse than this one. Then he spoke, slow, firm, each word carrying its own weight. Then let us share the bed, forever if need be. Naomi went still as stone. It wasn't jest, nor deceit. The answer rang clear, a vow with no witness needed. In that instant something struck her rawest wound, and yet, for the first time, lifted her toward a faith she'd never held. Years of exile, and no one had ever spoken to her like that. Her chest heaved, hand whitening against the doorframe. She didn't know whether to slam it shut or pull it wide. In her mind, the gossip of Green Hollow rose like a tide, then broke against the quiet presence before her. He didn't push, didn't press. He only waited. She stepped back half a pace. Her own heartbeat roared in her ears, mingling with the sound of his breath and the gale outside. Almost without knowing, she loosened her grip from the latch. The door cracked open, just enough for a man and a weary horse to step inside. When the door shut, Naomi leaned against the wall, trembling. In that small shack, there was no space left to hide. She knew it with a clarity sharp as glass. From the moment she let Colton Hayes cross her threshold, the life of silence and solitude she had lived would never be the same again. Naomi Carter had never belonged to Green Hollow. The western town with its red dirt roads curling past the church, its small market with a handful of stalls selling corn, flour, and tanned hides, its saloon where men lingered deep into the night, all of it had closed its doors to her from the very first day. When Naomi arrived, folks gave her a glance, then a label. A black woman, no husband, no kin, living in a shack apart from the valley. In a land where every life was mapped by the watchful eyes of neighbors, that alone was enough to brand her an outcast shadow. At first, Naomi tried to smile, to greet. She carried her basket of dried corn to market, hoping for a thread of conversation. What she received were sidelong looks, curt nods given out of duty, or the hollow chill of indifference. Once, while she bent over scraps of cloth, two women at her side whispered loud enough for her to hear. "Does she think any man would marry her? A woman alone is like a lantern in the dark. Any passerby can snuff it out." Naomi pretended not to hear, her hand gripping the handle of her basket until her knuckles burned. That night, she sat long by the fire, gaze locked on the flickering flame, her heart heavy. The words were not new, yet each time they cut as if fresh steel had struck her flesh. The townsfolk called her the Stray. Naomi heard it from children's lips as they dashed by, from the slurred contempt of drunken men. At first, she pushed back, eyes flashing with anger, sometimes spitting words of defiance. But she learned quick. Resistance only fed their laughter. And so she chose silence. Silence as her shield. Yet deep inside, Naomi longed to be seen. Not pitied, not gawked at. Just once to be regarded as human, no more, no less. Each time she faced the dim mirror, she saw a sun-darkened face, eyes of somber brown, features lacking the polished beauty of the town's fine ladies. Behind those eyes, though, lived a yearning that no voice could shape. Naomi knew that in Green Hollow no one would choose her, not because she was unworthy, but because prejudice had been baked into the soil, gleaming in every glance weighted with disdain. And so she sealed her heart, resigned to a place on the margins. It was that hollow, that silence swallowed day after day, that made the knocking in the windstorm a turning point. From that moment forward, Naomi was no longer merely the stray in Green Hollow's eyes. She had become a woman standing at a threshold, facing a destiny about to change. That morning, Naomi drew her old cotton shawl tight around her shoulders, an empty wicker basket in hand. She needed cornmeal to keep through the winds that were coming. The road to the market lay under a fine film of dust, footprints crisscrossing where others had passed. From a distance she heard the familiar clamor, the bark of traders, the squeal of hogs, the whinny of horses, all of it weaving into the restless music of a small frontier town. But for her, the market was not a place of cheer. It was a place of eyes. Naomi stepped into the dirt square where the stalls crowded shoulder to shoulder. At once the air shifted. Conversations fell lower. Heads tipped toward her, whispers trailing. Naomi kept her gaze forward, her stride steady, but inside she tightened. She knew the tune of their talk. Gossip in Green Hollow never slept. A man stacking sacks of cornmeal looked her over, smirk tugging his lip. "A woman alone is easy pickings," he said, not loud, but enough for those around him to hear and snicker. Naomi halted for a breath, biting her lip, then moved on. Each step felt as though she were sinking through mud. She stopped at the stall of an old woman who sold ground corn. Naomi's hands trembled faintly as she set her basket down, her voice small but firm. "A pound of cornmeal." The old woman would not meet her eyes. She weighed, measured, shook her head softly. Naomi took the sack, placed it in her basket. Behind her, she could feel stares prickling her back like a scatter of pins. Across the way, a knot of women choosing apples cut glances her direction. One leaned to another, words pitched just so. Living on the edge of town, she must have no shortage of men knocking her door at night. Laughter bubbled sharp, cutting as steel. Naomi bent her head, hiding her eyes. Her grip on the basket handle grew so tight her fingers whitened. The words were no stranger to her. She had heard them since the day she set foot in Green Hollow. But this time they cut deeper, because echoing inside her still was that voice from the storm-dark night. "Then let us share the bed, forever, if need be." A vow not yet rooted into faith, torn apart now by their jeers. Naomi walked on, chin lifted though her eyes slid from every face. She tried to hold herself calm, but her heart churned. She felt not like a buyer at market, but a spectacle for the crowd's amusement. Every sidelong glance, every crooked smile was a reminder she did not belong. A child darted past, clutching a hunk of bread. He clipped her basket, the crust falling into the dust. The boy stooped quick, picked it up, and looked up at her, eyes wide and unmarked by the dirt of prejudice. Naomi's lips softened toward a smile, ready to speak. But in a heartbeat, a hand yanked him away. His mother's face was stern, her voice like frost. "Don't stand so close." The words lashed Naomi raw, snuffing out the smile before it could bloom. She drew a breath, swallowing the bitterness. Then she turned from the market, shoulders square though her steps faltered. Passing stall after stall, she felt the whole town turn its face away, leaving her in a hollowed space of her own. At the red dust road beyond, Naomi stopped, dragging in air as if it might steady her. She touched the edge of her shawl, seeking what little comfort she could. Inside, her chest burned sharp. For years, she had learned to live with contempt. But today it pierced deeper, stirring the pain she had tried so long to bury. Was it true? That her silence, her stubborn decency, had only made it easier for them to brand her all the more? Naomi gripped her basket hard and walked on toward the shack at the valley's edge. The whispers trailed her, tangled in the wind and dust. She did not cry. Tears had long since dried, leaving only the heavy hollow. But her steps did not break. Naomi knew well enough, if she stopped, if she bent, that would be the victory they had waited for, and that she had never allowed. Naomi left the market with the sack of cornmeal in her basket, the wind lifting dust around each step. Behind her, the whispers still lingered in her mind, droning like a swarm of bees that would not quiet. She knew she could not chase them away at once. But when she raised her eyes, she saw Colton walking alongside, leading his horse. He said nothing, did not even meet her gaze. He simply walked at her side, broad shoulders cutting the wind, the horse's hooves thudding soft against the dirt. Naomi felt a start of surprise. In Green Hollow, no one had ever chosen to walk beside her without fear of gossip. Others kept their distance, careful to mark the space between. But Colton did not. He offered no defense in words, no muttered comfort. His silence alone was enough. It lay around her like an unseen shield, warding off the eyes at her back. She dared a glance at him. His stride was steady, calloused hands firm on the reins, his face hard and dust-streaked. No wasted gestures, no need to explain himself. Yet every movement carried a calm weight that made Naomi feel she was no longer standing alone. By the time they reached the wooden shack, the sun had fallen and darkness blanketed the valley. Naomi lit the fire, its glow flaring against the rough-hewn walls. She sat, letting her tangled curls spill loose, slowly braiding them back strand by strand. Her fingers trembled, not just from the weariness of the day, but from the emotions rising and pressing tight. Colton had settled his horse outside, then stepped in. He lowered himself across from her by the fire, offering neither intrusion nor question. His eyes followed the leaping flame, his stillness as if the fire itself held all his thought. Naomi dropped her gaze to the half-braided hair, the firelight sharpening each tired line of her face. For the first time, in the presence of another, she felt no need to hide it. The silence stretched, not heavy as she had always known it, but wide, making space for words she had never spoken. Her voice broke that space, fragile but clear. I have never loved anyone, never been chosen. The words fell soft, like embers from the fire, yet in her chest they landed heavy as stone. She had never confessed this to a soul. In Green Hollow, no one had wanted to hear. To speak it was to bear a wound unhealed. Yet before Colton, it came as though she had been waiting to release it all along, a confession needing no permission. Colton lifted his eyes. His gray gaze caught hers and did not waver. He did not rush to deny, nor twist his face with pity. For a moment there was only silence. Then his low voice sounded, firm and sure. It isn't your fault. Folks are only afraid of what they don't understand. Naomi froze. The words were plain, but within them lay what she had never known: recognition. All her life the blame had been hammered onto her, her skin, her poverty, her solitude. Colton cut through every chain with a single sentence. They feared her not because she was wrong, but because they could not grasp her. The fire cracked, light dancing in his eyes, turning them to deep water. Naomi felt something shift inside, not because he promised her anything, but because he had listened. She realized sometimes what a soul needs is not an answer, but someone steady enough to sit, to hear every unspoken ache. She turned aside, hiding a long breath. Her fingers kept braiding, though each strand now seemed lighter. The whispers of the market still echoed in her memory, but no longer with the same sting. In the small cabin, there was a man sitting quietly by her fire, and his presence had softened the hollow inside her. Outside, the wind still tore at the walls, carrying the dust of the west. But within, there were two souls, a fire, and a silence no longer lonely. Naomi knew it was only a beginning, yet from this moment she had crossed an unseen boundary. From an outcast, she had dared let another step into the words she had never before spoken. The days Colton remained in Naomi's cabin, the autumn wind kept scouring through the cracks in the walls. Now and then, a drop of old rain fell from the leaking roof, leaving dark stains down the boards. Yet the house, once marked only by Naomi's solitude, now breathed with another rhythm, slow, steady, carrying the weight of a man's presence. At dawn, Naomi rose as she always had, kindling the fire and stirring a thin pot of cornmeal. But that first morning she found Colton already seated on the porch, knife in hand, trimming broken planks along the steps. The sound of steel striking wood rang steady and sure. Naomi lingered in the doorway, her fingers clutching the hem of her dress, uncertain what words to speak. In her memory, no one had ever begun a day by mending something for her. Colton glanced up, his gray eyes brushing hers. He gave only a small nod, then bent back to the work. No explanation, no flourish. It was that quiet resolve that eased her heart, as though he needed no reason to help, save that he had chosen to stay. By noon, sunlight spilled through the ragged eaves. Naomi set on the table a thin stew of salted meat and wild greens. She feared it meager, feared he might turn away. Yet Colton sat, ate slow, not a spoonful left behind. At times his eyes lifted, stern yet warm, and Naomi turned her face aside to hide the tears that burned behind her lashes. To others, the meal might be nothing, but to her his steady presence was proof that what she offered was not small. In the afternoon, Colton led his horse to the creek. Naomi followed, basket at her side. They spoke little, listening instead to water rushing over stone, to the hooves pressing the riverbed. At one point, Colton stooped, scooped water in his hands, and sent a splash gently toward her. The cold drops startled her into laughter, soft, unforced, born from someplace long forgotten. She could not remember the last time she had laughed without effort. Colton's mouth curved faintly, but he said nothing, only turned back to the horse. The moment passed like wind across the valley, yet within Naomi it carved a line of light. From that night on, Naomi began to grow accustomed to the cadence of another life alongside hers. When she hung clothes on the line, Colton fixed the sagging rope. When she strained beneath a water bucket, his hand lifted it with ease. When the wind shoved through the doorframe, he wedged another plank across. Not grand gestures, only the small work of hands. But pieced together, they formed a picture Naomi had never known before, the shape of being shared. Day by day, she realized the shack no longer pressed so heavy upon her. The roof still leaked, the walls still bore scars, the bed still creaked beneath its weight. But the space had changed. It carried the echo of footsteps not her own, the steady look of eyes free from judgment, the presence that turned silence into shelter rather than solitude. Late afternoon, the last light spilled down into the valley, washing the weathered roof of the shack in a pale gold. Colton led his horse out toward the fields, his tall frame fading against the slope of grass. Naomi stood on the porch, watching him until he vanished. For a fleeting breath, she felt peace. Rare, fragile, like an easy inhale after years of tightness. Then she turned back inside, folding scraps of cloth, feeding a few sticks of wood to the fire. The cabin was still. Naomi sat by the hearth, weaving strands of her black hair, fingers moving with practiced care. For a moment she felt she had brushed against an ordinary rhythm of life, one untouched by whispers, free of eyes. But then came the sound of hooves outside, sharp and unfamiliar, not Colton's. She looked up. Through the small window she saw a rider halt at the porch. The sinking sun laid bare the face of a middle-aged woman. Sharp features, skin burnt by the road, eyes narrow and cold. She sat straight in the saddle, her dusted cloak draped heavy, a crumpled paper clutched in hand. Naomi froze at the doorway. Instinct told her trouble had come. The woman wasted no greeting, no courtesy. Her voice fell flat and hard. "Your father died owing a debt. He's gone. The daughter pays." The words struck like a hammer. Naomi gripped the doorframe, her mind reeling. Her father, a debt, payment. Memory spun her back to the thin figure coughing through long nights, the weary eyes that turned aside when she asked about money. Never had she heard of any paper, any due. She thought all of that had been buried with him. Yet here it was, dragged to her doorstep. The woman urged her horse half a step nearer, thrust the paper toward Naomi. "It's all written. If you don't pay, this land is no longer yours." Naomi's hand shook as she took it. The paper was rough, the ink blurred, the words slanted but legible. Each line burned against her skin. She tried to hold it steady, but sweat slipped across her fingers. Her eyes blurred, the words swimming, not from the dimming sun, but from the jolt within her. Her heart pounded wild. This house, the only roof she had left, the keeper of her scant memories, the thin anchor of her life, suddenly stood on the edge of vanishing. Her knees felt ready to give. The woman did not linger. She gave Naomi one last cold stare, without pity, then jerked the reins. Hooves hammered the dirt, iron striking hard, dust curling up in clouds. No farewell, no look back. Only Naomi left, paper trembling in her grasp. She sank onto the step, body hollow, as though a single gust might scatter her. The sunlight cut slant across the porch, but to Naomi's eyes the world dimmed to shadow. The paper quivered in her hands, keeping pace with her ragged breath. Her head bent, curls falling forward, veiling her face. She thought of her father, of loss that had always trailed behind him, of his sighs when the coins failed to buy medicine. She had never blamed him. But now the debt rose like a wound torn fresh, forcing her to bear what even death had not ended. Questions pressed in fast. How to pay? With what? When all she had was a patched roof and soil too lean to yield. If the shack was taken, where would she go? In Green Hollow, who would give her a corner to stand? Fear spread like cold water creeping into her chest. She clutched the paper against her, fingers crushing its edges to pulp. Once more she felt herself thrust back into the place the town had marked for her. The outsider, the unwanted, the woman without claim. Evening wind swept across the porch, dust rising thick. Naomi sat motionless, her vision swimming. She had believed herself hardened to the gossip, to abandonment, but one old letter was enough to shake down the fragile walls she had built. In that moment, Naomi knew what she had tried to bury beneath silence and endurance could not hold back the ghost of the past. And now that ghost had come knocking, carrying the threat to tear away the thin piece she had only just begun to touch. If you don't pay, this land is no longer yours. The words echoed through Naomi's mind long after the hooves had faded over the ridge. The strange woman was gone, leaving the yard hushed, but for the dust curling in the wind. Naomi still sat collapsed on the step, the paper trembling in her hands. She looked around, the patched cabin walls, the roof that leaked with every rain, the warped boards and clouded windows with only one pane still whole. To the town it was nothing but a shack, hardly worth a glance. But to Naomi it was everything, her one anchor, the place that had carried all her memories, her father's hacking cough, her mother at the fire, her own long nights alone. She pressed the paper to her chest. It felt cold as iron, heavy as stone. The ink was blurred, yet sharp enough to cut her mind raw. Her father, the debt. How could she pay? Naomi felt caught in a trap woven years ago, the net tightening only now when it was too late to slip free. Her father's image rose before her, slumped in a broken chair, eyes weary and avoiding hers as when she asked of money. The cough that split his chest, the ragged breath. She had thought it only the weight of sickness. Now she knew he must have hidden the notes, hidden the despair, to keep his daughter from bearing it. But death had not buried it. Debt lived on, searching, demanding its due. Naomi bent low, shoulders trembling, her lips pressed tight to hold back the sobs. She had grown too used to restraint. No tears in the market. No weakness before cruel eyes. But now, with only herself and the paper, the defenses fell. A single tear slid down, dropping onto the edge of the page, bleeding into the slanted script. She asked herself, if she lost the house, where could she go? Green Hollow had never opened its arms. The scornful stares, the whispers from that very morning still stung her ears. They had already named her the outcast. If she wandered without roof or land, what name would they give her then? A failure? A woman too weak to keep even the soil her father left? Her gaze drifted toward the porch where Colton's horse often passed. A fragile thought flickered. If only he were here. If only there were shoulders she could lean on in this moment. But the thought startled her. She had spent her whole life learning not to lean. She feared that if she placed her trust, it would shatter like all else before. The wind rose, sweeping grit across the porch, making her shiver. She staggered up, clutching the wrinkled paper, sodden now with sweat and tears. Inside, the cabin lay dim, the fire guttering low. Naomi sank into the wooden chair, hands covering her face, breath ragged. The weight pressed down as if the walls themselves had begun to close in, squeezing the air from her chest. Inside the wooden shack, the fire had burned down to embers, only a faint glow brushing the dark-stained walls. Naomi sat for hours, the debt paper spread on the table, its edges curled from her clenched grip. Her eyes were dry, scoured raw, no more tears left to fall. Yet inside her, a flood still raged. As night pressed deeper, Naomi rose and stepped into the small room where she kept what little she owned. The room was so bare that each item clung to a memory. The rickety bed, the old trunk with rusted hinges, the few faded clothes. Too little to call wealth, yet to her it was a whole life. She knelt, lifted the trunk lid, The smell of damp wood and old cloth drifted up, stirring recollections long buried. Quietly, she packed a dress, a pair of worn shoes, the weathered Bible her mother had once read aloud. Her hands moved slow, almost without thought. Each piece lowered into the basket was a thread cut loose, one more tie severed from this place. Her fingers trembled when they brushed the corner of the trunk. There, wrapped in thin cloth, lay her mother's scarf. The fabric was frayed, torn in places, yet still carried a faint breath of lavender once dried in summer air. Naomi lifted it gently, cupped it in both hands, pressed it against her cheek. The fabric was thin, but its warmth struck deep, near breaking her chest. Tears spilled, unrestrained. Silent trails streaked down her face, soaking into the scarf. For so long she had held them back. No tears in the marketplace, none before the sneers of the town. But here, alone with her mother's relic, the dam gave way. Naomi sank to the floor, clutching the scarf tight to her breast. She thought of her mother, the woman who had taught her to stand firm, to live even when no one chose her. Her mother's words returned. You may be left behind, but you must never leave yourself. Naomi had believed, had tried to live by them. But tonight, the weariness outweighed the will. She asked herself if her mother would fault her for leaving, for walking away from the shack, from the memories, from the soil her parents had guarded. Or would her mother understand that sometimes a soul only seeks to escape a burden too heavy to carry? Naomi folded the scarf neatly, placed it in the basket, as though tucking a part of her mother's spirit to carry on the road. She drew a long breath, then stood, legs heavy as stone. The dim lamplight stretched her shadow thin across the wall, long, frail, trembling. She stepped onto the porch. The night wind struck her face, carrying grit sharp against her skin. The sky lay shrouded, the moon hidden behind clouds. Her grip on the basket's handle tightened, heart thundering. The thought of leaving pressed hard, but it was the only road she could see. If she stayed, she would watch this house stripped away, hear the town's laughter cut her to pieces. But if she left, at least she might keep a shred of dignity, even if it meant exile. Night pressed heavy over Green Hollow. Wind hissed through the cracks, sand scratching against the roof like fingernails on rotten wood. Naomi sat at the table, her basket of belongings tied and waiting at her feet. The choice to leave hung above her like a blade. One no hand had risen to stay. She opened the debt paper once more, lamplight spilling across the blurred lines of ink. Each word carved like a scar into her heart. Naomi shut her eyes, swallowing the ragged breath. Her fingers trembled, clutching the paper until it crumpled beneath her grip. The door creaked open, sudden, making her flinch. Colton stepped in, his tall shadow filling the narrow room. He brushed the dust from his coat, gray eyes catching firelight beneath the oil lamp. Naomi turned away quick, trying to hide the basket by her feet. But his gaze had already fallen there, steady, silent, taking note. Without a word, he moved closer and reached for the paper on the table. Naomi wanted to hold fast, but his calloused hand was firm, and she let go before she realized. He read it, eyes scanning swift. His face barely shifted, but his jaw tightened, as though pressing something deep inside. Colton set the paper back, eyes never leaving hers. His voice came low, certain, less suggestion than command. "Let me handle it." Naomi froze. She lifted her tear-brimmed eyes to him. the fire's glow flickering across her face. "It's not your burden," she whispered, her voice trembling, almost pleading. In all her life, no one had stood for her, so her first instinct was denial. Colton shook his head, slow, unwavering. "From the night I knocked on your door, it became mine." The words broke something in her chest. This man had no reason to stay, no cause to shoulder debts that weren't his. Yet he spoke as though it were the plain order of things, as though their fates had joined the moment his fist struck wood in the storm. Naomi's tears spilled free. "You don't know what they say about me. If you tie yourself to me, you'll bear their contempt too." Colton was silent for a breath. Then he drew a chair, sat across from her, hands steady on the worn table. His gray eyes locked to hers, unflinching. His voice came deep, slow, immovable. "What they say doesn't matter. I'll pay it. But you must promise me one thing. You don't run anymore." Naomi sat still, the tears falling harder now, unstoppable. Never had anyone spoken to her so, not out of pity, not casting her as weak, but simply out of truth and choice. The silent shield she had carried all her life seemed suddenly needless. Colton had stepped past it, not by force but by a strength that would not bend. She raised her hands to her face, shoulders shaking. The basket at her feet seemed to grow heavy, proof of her intent to flee. Shame stung her for wanting to run, but stronger than that was the easing inside her. For the first time, the burden was no longer hers alone. Colton didn't press, he waited, patient, as though willing to sit the whole night through until she raised her head. The cabin held only the crack of burning wood, Naomi's labored breaths, the hush of two lives colliding. Outside, the wind still shrieked, but within, something had shifted. At last, Naomi lowered her hands. Her eyes were red and swollen, yet her gaze had changed. She no longer looked at him as a stranger, but as a place of steadiness. His words still rang. "From the night I knocked on your door, it became mine." She gave a small nod. No sound, no vow spoken aloud, but enough for herself to know. The promise was sealed inside. She would not run again. Colton tilted his head, the steel in his eyes softening. He reached out, resting his hand lightly on the table, not touching her, only close enough that she could see it was there, waiting, ready to lift what weight she would share. And in that moment, Naomi understood. This was no longer the story of a woman against the world. A man had chosen to stand beside her, not in pity, but in truth. That morning, the snow had only just ceased, the trail still veiled in white. Naomi sat astride her horse, gloved hands trembling faintly. Beside her, Colton led his mount straight toward town. In the saddlebag at her side lay the pouch of money he had prepared, enough to silence the debt her father had left behind. The woman who had once brought the old letter stood waiting before the merchant's store. Her dark cloak caught the pale light, her face sharp, eyes cold. When she saw Colton and Naomi draw up, her lips curled in a thin, disdainful smile. Colton was the first to dismount. Without delay, he set the pouch of money upon the wooden counter. His voice carried firm, resolute. "This settles it. From this day, Naomi Carter owes nothing." The woman opened the pouch, counted quick. Surprise flickered across her eyes, though her mouth held tight, unwilling to yield more than a curt nod. Naomi stood just behind, her heart pounding. She wanted to believe the nightmare had ended, yet part of her braced for another cruel word. Colton turned back, his hand reaching to help Naomi down. A simple act, but beneath the watch of the gathering townsfolk, it rang like a declaration. Faces turned, whispers hushed. Men and women who had once smirked or sneered as Naomi passed now fixed their gaze on the pair. Colton did not flinch. He took Naomi's hand and drew her beside him. His voice rose, steady and loud enough that none could pretend not to hear. "From this day I declare I will take Naomi Carter as my wife. Not from pity, not from gossip, but because she deserves happiness." Silence fell. The market, noisy a breath before, froze still save for the wind pushing through the eaves. Naomi stood stunned, her hand burning within his. She felt the steady beat of his pulse, strong as the words he had spoken. A murmur rippled the crowd. A woman covered her mouth in shock. A man who once mocked Naomi faltered, his eyes darting away. Children clung close to their mothers, staring wide-eyed. All of them confronted a truth they had never imagined. The outcast woman, now chosen, openly, before all. Naomi's throat closed. She had grown used to bowing her head, to enduring quietly, and now brought forth not as mockery but as someone worthy. Her chest shook with awe, her knees nearly weak. Colton tightened his hold and spoke again, his voice low, rough, but unyielding. "Let them whisper all they will. I'll stand with Naomi. From the night I knocked on her door, I knew I had found where I belonged. And from this day, she will never stand outside the circle again." Naomi lifted her gaze, tears blurring her vision, but shining with fire. For the first time, she felt no shame beneath their stares. For beside her stood the man who had stripped the whispers of power, turning them into nothing. The debt keeper pressed her lips thin, then turned away without a word. The crowd slowly broke apart, but the looks they left behind had shifted. No longer only scorn, but something startled, even cautious. Naomi felt it. The ground beneath her had changed. Colton looked to her then, a small nod sealing what words need not. Naomi felt it pierce her heart. He had given her what no one ever had: recognition, choice, a place to belong. Her lips trembled, cheeks flushed from wind and emotion. She whispered, "Just for him. All my life I was never chosen, until today." Colton's hand closed firmer over hers. In his eyes burned the same steady fire as the hearth in that valley cabin. And Naomi knew this was no fleeting vow. This was the step that carried her out from shadows of rumor into the light of the home she had always deserved. Weeks had passed since the night Colton set the debt note upon the table and said he would see to it. Green Hollow had not stopped whispering. Each time Naomi walked through the market, she felt the stares linger longer, the sly laughter dig deeper. Rumor traveled swift, that she had bound a stranger to shoulder her father's debt, that she had snared a man with nothing more than ease and desperation. Naomi heard it all, but the words no longer pierced as they once had. For each time she returned to the shack, Colton was there, sitting quiet on the porch, sharpening his blade, or mending a bridle strap. His presence was a wall behind her back, and it steadied her through the days. One morning, Colton saddled the horses. When Naomi asked, he only said, "Ride with me." No more, no less. Her chest tightened, her heart quick with unease. Yet his gaze was steady enough for her to place her trust. She mounted, letting him lift her up before him in the saddle. The road out of Green Hollow was rough, red dust curling beneath the hooves. Naomi felt the eyes of the town upon them, some scornful, some wide with surprise. But soon the noise of the town fell behind. The horses took the narrow trail toward the valley, where the wind carried the scent of dry grass and pine sap. Naomi sat before him, her hands light on the horn, listening to the rhythm of hooves beating sure against the ground. She did not know where Colton meant to take her. But with each stride away from the town, her chest loosened, as though invisible chains were falling away link by link. The climb was not easy. Deep ruts, loose stones, steep pitches that made the horses strain. Naomi swayed with each motion, her dark curls tossed wild in the wind. Yet she felt Colton's hands steady on the reins, the solid warmth of him at her back. No words were wasted. His calm alone flowed into her, enough to still her trembling. When the horses crested a low ridge, the land unfolded. Before her stretched a wide valley, grass rippling gold in the wind, weathered fences running down the slope. And further yet, a house stood, large, timbered, its roof silvered by years yet strong against the horizon. Naomi caught her breath. She had never seen such space. The cramped market, the leaking shack, all of it fell small before this sweep of land. Her heart raced, tangled between awe and dread. Colton drew the horses to a halt on the rise, giving her the view. He did not speak. His eyes were on her, watching, waiting. Naomi swallowed hard, her gaze locked on the house. A wide porch, wood aged but sound, windows opening to the valley. Around it, barns, fences, smoke rising thin from afar, the signs of life anchored in the land. The sight struck her, leaving her dizzy with wonder and doubt. Why had he brought her here? She turned her head as though to test if it were illusion. But the scents of grass, timber, and earth told her it was real. She looked back at Colton. He sat straight in the saddle, gray, eyes fixed on the valley. No smile, no boast. Only a calmness that said this place was as much a part of him as the breath he drew. Naomi turned again to the house. The past pressed in, nights hearing wind claw through the walls of her shack, the loneliness when the town turned its back, the terror of nearly losing even that frail shelter. And now, here before her, stood a place too broad, too firm, too unlike anything she had ever called her own. Her heart quivered. She dared not touch the thought of hope. Each time she had lit a spark of dreaming before, it had been crushed. But the sight of that house, rooted in the valley, sent the thought through her like a flash. Could this be the place I belong? Colton drew a breath, as though to speak. Yet he remained silent, letting the quiet lie between them, giving her time to see, to feel, to face it herself. Sometimes silence was the truest introduction. Naomi clutched the folds of her dress, eyes never leaving the valley. Inside, the old chords of fear, of shame, of every whispered slur still trembled. She did not yet know what waited ahead, but the rough road behind, the road Colton had led her upon, had opened more than a landscape. It had opened a possibility she had never dared imagine. The horses stood still on the ridge, wind sweeping through with the scent of hay and timber. Colton loosed the reins in one hand and gestured toward the valley with the other. His voice carried low, certain, without boast. This is my land. If you'll have it, come here, not just with me, but with the horses, the hills, and the house. Naomi went still. The words struck through her chest like a bell tolling. All her life she had heard voices that shut doors, whispers that cast her out, reminders that she had no place in Green Hollow. And now, here was a man behind her saddle, opening a door wide, not with pity but with plain truth ringing in his tone. She did not answer at once. Her eyes clung to the house standing firm beneath the hill. It was too large, too sound, for the life she had known. Wide porch, windows flung to the valley, fences holding fast. It spoke of permanence, while she had only ever known patched leaks, broken panes, nights where the wind howled through splintered walls. A tremor of fear stirred in her chest. Part of her longed to believe this could be a beginning. Another part whispered back, "Do I deserve it? If I walk into this place, will I break it?" Colton said nothing more. He let her look, let silence hold between them. His quiet was not pressure, not demand. It was space, space that made her heart stumble harder. Naomi drew a long breath. Memory rose sharp. Afternoons at the market, whispers that a woman alone is easy pickings. Evenings ducking the scorn in neighbors' eyes. Nights in a shack where the bed stayed empty. Never in her life had she been invited, never chosen. And now, with a single sentence, Colton had stripped all that away, placing before her what she had never dared imagine: a home. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. He sat straight, his gray eyes steady, unflinching. No smile, no flourish. Only a look that said one thing: he would keep his word. Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask why, but the word choked off. Every man she had known, whether a glance at the market or a drunkard's leer, had treated her as something to be used and cast aside. But Colton had only been silent, saying little and saying it plain. "If you want, this is your place." Her chest heaved. Tears welled, not from sorrow, but from the jolt of it. From the edge of exile she had been invited in. From standing alone, she was now given a door held open. Naomi looked again at the valley. Grass bent and shimmered in the wind. A band of horses ran within the fence line. The beauty struck her eyes, but the true beauty was the voice still echoing inside her. An invitation, not gilded with pity, not tethered to rumor. Simple, unyielding. Stay. Inside, two tides wrestled. One was the old weight, fear of being cast out, of shame of being left once more. The other was the hunger she had never dared name, to be seen as worthy. And for the first time the balance tipped toward longing. Naomi tilted her head, watching him once more. His hand gripped the reins steady, his eyes unshaken. He did not hurry her, only sat, letting the wind pass over them both. Within her a whisper rose. "Perhaps I have walked far enough in solitude." She did not speak it aloud. She only drew in a breath, letting his presence and the vast valley sink deep into her soul. For Naomi knew, from this moment on, her life would not be bound to an empty bed, a leaking roof, or the whispers of Green Hollow. She had been invited into a true home, and that was something her life had never known. The first snow blanketed the valley. The land lay hushed beneath a vast white quilt, each flake falling soft and patient, gentling the wind that so often howled fierce. Naomi stood at the wide window of the big house, fingers trembling as she lifted the heavy curtain. The fabric smelled of dust and age, but her eyes shone bright. After years of patchwork cloth tacked against the drafts, one small gesture now showed her a different truth. For the first time in her life, she commanded a room not dismissed as worthless. She tied back the curtain and drew a deep breath. The air, thus, held the scent of dry wood, hearth smoke, and the old cloth itself, all blending into something strange, yet comforting. Naomi pressed her hand against the timber frame, feeling its strength, its thickness, so unlike the thin walls of her shack. The fear of wind prying in eased, replaced by a fragile peace. Hoofbeats echoed outside. Naomi quickly drew on her cloak and stepped to the porch. The sight struck her heart. Colton driving the horses into the corral, their breath pluming white in the snow. He moved steady, each gesture certain. Naomi descended the steps, clutching her cloak, and worked beside him, shutting the gate, tying the ropes, heaping hay for the herd. The wind reddened her face, but instead of curling into herself, she found her body moving sure at his side. Few words passed between them, only glances, nods. Yet that silence bound them more than speech. For the first time, she felt herself part of this place. When the chores were done, Colton slung firewood over his shoulder, Naomi cradling a smaller bundle. Together they went inside, wet boots marking the floorboards. She laid the wood by the hearth, and warmth soon drove out the sting of cold. She sat close, holding her hands to the flames, her chest swelling with something she had never known before: safety. The fire cast its glow across Colton's face as he settled in the chair beside her. The light sharpened the rugged lines, yet softened the sternness she had come to know. Naomi glanced at him, then quickly turned, fearing he might catch her gaze. But gratitude pressed hard inside her. He had not only given her a roof, but the chance to see herself no longer alone. She rose slowly and walked the breadth of the parlor. The broad table, the stout chairs, the shelves lined with dusty books. Each step felt like stepping into another world. She ran her hand across the table's surface, traced her fingers along the wood grain of the shelves, confirming each thing was real. Her memories had been too long marked by want, by the need to shrink into a corner of a shack. Now the house's breadth both awed her and shook her, yet fear gave way to quiet joy. Naomi moved toward the bedroom door, where a great bed lay under thick wool blankets. She stopped at the threshold, breath caught. For years, a bed had been nothing but a place to curl alone against the cold. Now, before her, stretched a room large enough for two, a blanket thick enough to guard against night winds. She sat at the edge, running her hand across the wool. The fabric was coarse but warm, each thread holding heat. She drew in a breath, closed her eyes, and let the warmth rise through her chest. A tear slid down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from wonder. Astonishment that she, too, could belong to a place warm as this. Colton appeared at the doorway, leaning against the frame. He spoke no word, only watched, quiet and steady. Naomi opened her eyes and met his gaze. She found no pity there, only certainty. A small nod from him sealed it, that this house was truly hers now, not a borrowed shelter. She turned back to the room, then to the window. Snow fell thick, whitening the whole valley. In the dimness, the firelight spilled wide, painting the scene with stillness and life both. For the first time, she did not see a room marked by an empty bed. For the first time, she was not left on the outside. Naomi pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the beat. It no longer raced with fear, but pulsed steady, keeping time with Colton's tread in the yard, with the fall of snow, with the warmth of this home. And she knew, this winter, her life had changed forever. That night, Snow fell heavy over the valley, each flake bound to the next, cloaking the fences and the roof until the world lay buried in white silence. Inside the big house, fire roared in the hearth, its glow dancing along the timbered walls, drawing flickers of gold across the ceiling beams. Naomi sat close to the flames, her hands rubbing gently together against the last chill that clung to her. Firelight caught her face, brown eyes bright, and this time not shadowed only by sorrow. A new light stirred there, like a tender shoot pushing up through frost. Colton stepped near, his tall figure casting a shadow across the fire. He did not speak at once, only lowered himself beside her. His hand reached out, rough, scarred by rains and iron. Naomi hesitated, then laid her hand into his. The feel of it stopped her breath, a certainty she had never known. His grip tightened, voice low and steady, each word an oath. "You don't have to sleep alone anymore. This is our home now." Naomi lifted her gaze. Fire reflected in his gray eyes, making them look like deep water, still yet unshakable. Her lips trembled, her heart beat fast against her ribs. The words were simple, yet heavy as a vow. All her life had been doors slammed, voices sending her away. And now, for the first time, one man had opened a door wide, not only with words, but with his very presence. She leaned her head against his shoulder. It was broad, warm, as steady as shelter in a storm. The scent of burning wood, horsehide, and cold wind clinging to his coat swirled together, tightening her chest. Her voice came soft, trembling but clear. "And I'll stay. Always." Tears spilled, but they were no longer the bitter tears of despair. They were warm, gentle, like a spring rising clear. Naomi let them fall, no longer hiding them. For the first time they marked not pain, but greeting, a welcome to a new beginning. Colton inclined his head, eyes gentling. He said no more, for no promise beyond this moment was needed. His hand only closed firmer around hers, carving truth into the present. In the house the fire blazed bright, wood snapping in rhythm with two hearts drawn together. Naomi looked about. The new curtain, the wool blanket on the bed, the solid table. No longer things of timber and cloth alone, but witnesses to a truth she had never held. Belonging. Outside snow fell, burying the old tracks, sealing off the road back to town. Yet Naomi felt no fear. For the first time she was not braced against the cold alone. Behind thick walls, in the arms of this man, she knew this house would never be empty again. She closed her eyes, leaning against Colton. In the fire-lit shadows, she felt as though she had found her anchor at last. Not a shelter only, but a home. And in that moment, Naomi knew this winter, and all the winters after, she would not be lost again. Snow kept falling, layering the valley in white, but inside the fire burned bright. Not only the hearth, but a fire of beginning, of a woman once cast aside, now within a home filled with warmth, a hand holding hers. Naomi no longer lay in an empty bed, and Colton, too, had found his anchor after a life of wandering. Their story reminds us, happiness is not always built of grand things, but of someone who chooses to stay, despite whispers, despite watching eyes. It is the reward of endurance and the gift of trust. Dear friends, Perhaps each of us has known long nights of loneliness, but even then, it may be that one warm hand will reach for ours. If this story has stirred memory or belief within you, share it in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to walk with us through more Wild West love stories, warm, enduring, and full of echo.